the Beatles never would have happened if they hadn't worked as hard and worked their asses off like they did. We wouldn't have the Beatles. Yesterday, Scot Lade of the Prog Corner had an amazing video. I would say it was one of the more or if not most important videos he's ever made. In fact, it's called A New Golden Age of Prog, a Prog Revival. So I watched the video. I was quite inspired by it. He's getting a ton of commenters below, and I enjoyed reading those comments. And I made a comment myself, and I thought, well, I'd like to just make a little video response to that idea of a Prog Revival. I would call it a resurgence. That would be my take on it. I mean, just look at me for an example. I was a Prog fan as a kid in the 70s, and when the mid-90s came along, I had my own band. I was making prog music and sending it to labels. We had a prog band, and people were rejecting our music, saying it was too progressive. So I kind of got eventually fed up with the whole concept of prog rock. I thought, okay, I guess the glory days are over. I'm going to move on. And I moved on toward a different kind of focus as a songwriter and musician and all that. But anyways, 20, 30 years later, I started a YouTube channel, and I was teaching guitar lessons for Rush, mostly Rush guitar lessons, and yes, Steve Howe guitar lessons I'm teaching. And then I got into reactions, and I thought, okay, I'll react to, because I didn't really want to do that. My wife suggested it, and I thought, well, I guess I could try reacting to prog. I hear there's lots of prog bands out there. You know, I don't know much of them. There's this band called Tool. There's a band called, well, I heard about Muse. I knew that Muse had kind of dabbled in prog. And so anyways, I'm an example of the prog resurgence because I was not interested in prog, and suddenly I started doing all those reactions, and I started realizing that there's not only tens of prog bands, there's friggin' hundreds, literally hundreds. And my channel, I focused on reactions over the pandemic, and sort of made that my thing. It sort of kept me sane actually through the pandemic, and yeah, and it's never ended. You know, I've just really enjoyed reacting to prog and getting into prog and discovering that there is so much prog. It's like holy mackerel. It's and you know, some of it I had to warm up to. For example, the heavier prog when there's the screaming, the growling, that I didn't like at first, especially to associate that with prog. To me, prog was growing up. For example, it started with Alan Parsons' Project, the first album that came out, and then I started following him, and then Tangerine Dream, and then Tubular Bells, Mike Oldfield, and Tangerine Dream were kind of close. I really got into that, and then that led into one prog band after another. Genesis, yes. Eventually Rush, you know, and Pink Floyd. I got more into Pink Floyd. You know, there's so many bands of the old days are still performing even today and still on the tour circuit, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, definitely prog is still alive. I have a lot of hope that that the youth are showing signs of interest in prog. For example, I cited a couple. Like when I did my Reacts channels, I was always saying, oh, let's hear some bands that are sort of prog, or they're leaning into prog, and a lot of the Japanese bands were doing that. It turns out in Japan, prog rock really has never died. It's been always a strong market for prog. At the same time, also now they are producing their own bands, and a lot of them happen to be all female, which is just a thing. Anyways, that's something that's happening there. But I started reacting to different bands like Bandmade, and this can go to other continents too. I was hoping, you know, maybe these young ladies, one of them would discover, quote unquote, discover prog for herself, and sort of really get into Close to the Edge or something, and then decide, hey, you know what, come on, let's make our own prog album. You know, Bandmade makes a prog album. These are sort of my secret hopes. There's a band in Mexico called the Warning, which is a trio, 3 young ladies. Again, even though a lot of these there's a resurgence of classic rock, I mean, isn't that where prog came from, right? Prog marries a lot of the elements of rock and hard rock with classical, with jazz. You know, these 3, to me, in my mind, often kind of combine and sort of spark some interesting combinations. So there's a ton of bands that could go prog. I mean, nFuze was a good example of a band that sort of played with prog. In my mind, they're not pure prog in the sense, and I don't think they try to say they are. But it's just that people are I think with the resurgence and interest in prog, you can see that on YouTube, for example. Like, since I started my channel, it started off, this wasn't called Prog Dog, it's called Dean Wolfe. That was just my name. I was doing guitar lessons, then I got into reactions, prog reactions. Ended up, my brother suggested calling it Prog Dog because I had Prog Dog. He was sort of part of my scenery. Here he is, Prog Dog. He's Prog Dog, I'm not Prog Dog. I'm Dean Wolfe, and this is Prog Dog. But it just seemed like a nice handle for a catchy name and just a simple kind of idea, a concept. Also, it's a family-friendly channel. If you notice, we don't drop any F-bombs. I'm just starting to do a lot of more album reviews, and I'm getting CDs sent to me occasionally by bands, progressive rock bands. They're giving me their CDs and links to their new albums. I can't keep up. There's so much prog, it's like Niagara Falls now. There's so much prog coming down the river, and it's going to take more than just me. I can't keep up with it. That's why I'm so happy there are other channels. There's Sea of Tranquility, who's been around the block longer than me for sure. They're kind of a staple, sort of a pillar, And then you've got all the newer channels like the Prog Corner, like my Prog Dog channel, and then you got Nathan on Shuffle, and you got Notes reviews, and you've got classic album reviews. There's a good list of prog rock, maybe not 100% focused on prog all the time, but certainly very open to prog. So is there going to be a new golden age of prog? I think we're kind of in the middle of it in a subtle way. Obviously, it's all about the music. I think there is a next key, though. There's something that's missing, and that is the live aspect. Now, we see younger generations getting more interested in classic rock and realizing that classic rock was, like my kids have said, hey, Dad, how come all the great music is old music? It's all happened in the past. There's no great music coming out today. They admit this, my kids, So, although, of course, it's very debatable to say that there is a lot of great music. It's just not in the mainstream. It's happening underneath, and I think that's sort of like a grassroots. Let's say it's a grassroots idea then. That prog is grassroots growing right now. Let's give you some examples. Kate Bush, the song, what's it called? Anyways, it was on that show, the big TV show. Come on, brain, work here. Kate Bush has now getting a billion plays on Spotify because of her song being played on a popular show, which a lot of young people happen to watch. That's one example that people are kind of excited about. Let's see, there's lots of great new generation prog bands that are some younger people, like Kaken, like Leprous, like Space Kitchen is a band out of Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario. There's another guy, too, who I did a reaction to his whole album. Let me just put it on the screen there and a link to. He's a younger fella who made a concept album and reacted to the whole album. And it's pretty impressive. Obviously he's not saying, "Oh, I'm a progger. Who knows if he even likes prog?" But somehow he got inspired to make a concept album. And he's a young guy, right? So this is really important stuff to see this happening among the young players. Here's the missing link, though. Here's what really needs to happen for prog to go beyond just a grassroots thing into a legitimate mainstream again. Once again, a larger focused style of music. We need to see live music uptick big time, and I'm not talking about these tours that come through where you have to pay $250 to go see Ringo Starr and sit in a bad seat way in the back of a stadium somewhere. No, I'm talking about clubs. When I was a teenager, there were plenty of clubs to look around. On the weekends, that was the thing to do. In fact, you could look at the local entertainment in the newspaper where the theaters are, and then they have all the clubs, and the clubs have a long list of all the bands they're playing, and usually they're set out for a month in advance. All kinds of amazing bands, just local bands that are from other neighboring towns. They're coming through town. They're on tours through the province or state or whatever. I'm in Canada, so It used to be there were multiple clubs to choose from. Any night you could decide, any day of the week, in fact, you could say, I'm going to go see a band, And there's a huge difference between a band. For example, I'll cite the Beatles, The Beatles played for thousands of hours together. Before they became successful on an international scale, the Beatles had to hammer it out as musicians on a stage, intercommunicating between themselves, between the audience, getting a feel for their music, getting a feel for their instruments, getting a feel for their unique creativities. This has to happen. Right now, it's shameful. Right now, all the live venues, clubs, and things have been closing in my town, one after another. There are still a couple around, and there's definitely a bit of an uptick, I would say, and that's what we really need to see. The kids have got to get off of the TikTok and their Facebooks and all that, and say, hey, let's meet down at the club and check out this new band. And these new bands need audiences. And these bands is what it is. We don't need any more karaoke singers. We don't need any more America's Got Talent. Karaoke singing. It's anyone can do that. You just go up and start singing along with a pre-recorded track. The Beatles never would have happened if they hadn't worked as hard and worked their asses off like they did. They never would have happened. We wouldn't have the Beatles. We wouldn't have had the amazing revolution in music and rock music that we've had due to the bands like Beatles and whatnot, So that's what needs to happen in order for the next step or stair of progress. We need more bands, and we need younger, and just everyone basically just valuing live music again. Let's get back to valuing live music. Get back to going to the clubs, watching these live bands play, giving them a chance to find their feet or find their sea legs or whatever in the world of live music, because that's where metal is pounded, right? It's like that's where the gold is melted and purified and hammered into whatever, molded. This all happens by doing it, by going out, performing in front of people. It's not going to happen by people just sitting in their bedrooms, somehow that can happen as a flash in a pan, but there's a next step. You can't just have a hit out of your bedroom and then just keep doing that all the rest of your life, sitting in a bedroom. I mean, imagine if the Beatles sat in their bedrooms making an album. That wouldn't have worked. They had to go out, they had to be in the world, that make all those interactions, and sure, they actually quit touring live because the audiences and the technology of live performing was terrible. It would have been different today. I don't think they would have quit touring. It's a totally different atmosphere around today. So it's all about touring, and you can't just go see only the big acts, the big bad boys. You got to go see the young acts. You got to support that. People have to support the young and growing prog act. That's the thing I like about my channel. I get to expose some of these young acts, and I think that's really important. I have done that. So anyways, where am I going here? So songwriting only goes so far. You need a vehicle, and the vehicle is the band. And the band is the groups that get together and they work hard together, they stick together, they tour together, and audiences support that and nurture that. So that's what we need. Another point I wanted to make was back in the day, prog was huge. There were no epic movies. Star Wars came along and sort of revolutionized the whole theater movie scene. So suddenly epic and big, sort of like prog theater, basically. It's like prog movies. It took movies beyond just your standard movie into epics. So people have wanted epics. We've had an appetite for theatrical epics for many years. Prog came before that all happened, and when prog was at its biggest before that huge theatrical epic theater kind of movies cinema had even begun. So I think that may have deflated the wind or the sails a bit out of prog. But look at today. You got your Marvel, which is the latest prog theater, you know, epic, 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 everything's epic. Now it's dying out. People are getting tired of, I don't know, they're getting tired of the whole superhero business. I think that's a good example where music can fill that gap. Instead of going to the theater, you know, you go to a club and see a band who's up and coming and making amazing music. That's my video. I did ramble a bit, and but that's, I guess, inevitable. So any of you who stuck around all the way to the end, you know, give yourself a pat in the back, and I pat you in the back. Thank you for supporting my channel as I explore all of the new prog that's going on in the world and reviewing all the old stuff and the classic stuff. So talk to you all later, spiraling out like I always say, and bye now.